Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by BetaShares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, BetaShares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with BetaShares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. Hey, Gemma Mitchell, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. We are recording our first Q&A today, and hopefully this is something that we can bring to the Australian Finance Podcast community each and every week. All of the other Rask podcasts have a weekly session. This is the only one that's never had one, and I couldn't imagine anyone better to do it with than you, Gemma. You're a money coach and qualified financial advisor, so I'm excited for this. And so if you're listening, send in your questions. If you're watching, we would absolutely love to hear from you. There is a link in your podcast player or on YouTube. It's in the description that says podcast questions. Just select the Australian Finance Podcast. We just really want to hear from you. As you'll hear from Gemma, she's a wealth of knowledge. So, and I can, make a few animal noises or chime in with some insights here or there, but a bit more laid back Q&A and a debrief on what has been happening in the world at large. Gemma, let's start with what you've been doing this week. I imagine you've seen a few clients for coaching and that sort of stuff. Like, what's making news in your world?
Well, it's my daughter's birthday today, so it was a very early start. Usually I can't get her out of bed. She's 9. And yeah, today we were all up at 5 a.m, so that was great.
Did she get us some nice prezzies? Or?
Yeah, she did. She's going through Olivia Rodrigo fan phase, so everything was pretty much that singer. We've got a concert party on the weekend, so I did up like a stage set list of what's going to happen, and the tickets, concert tickets, like they're all just so excited. So that was lots of planning for this event. And then work-wise has been a big week as well. So I got a surprise call from the AFR, which was really exciting. Got to talk to them about couples managing money, which is always an interesting topic. So yeah, hopefully that'll be out in the next week or so, but that's a big subject that we could probably do a whole podcast episode on.
Yeah, definitely can. I just had to Google Olivia Rodrigo. She's a 21-year-old American singer-songwriter and actress. This is not my world, so I did not know that person existed.
Well, yeah, I know everything about her. We've got fan books, fact books, 101 facts on Olivia Rodrigo. I know everything about her.
Wow.
So yeah, when you get to that stage,
yeah, I'll enjoy it.
So in my household right now is dinosaurs and Olivia Rodrigo. That's all we talk about.
Okay. 39 million followers on Instagram. So that's okay. So I'm out of the loop, not everyone else.
So she's like your next Taylor Swift kind of, I guess.
Oh, that's big. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said AFR.
The Australian Financial Review.
Yeah, so you're talking about couples, did you say?
Yeah, they're doing an article on couples managing money and what makes a successful financial team, which is something that I like to talk about quite a bit because I find that in relationships, conflicts around money is one of the major things. So that was really fun talking to them about it. And yeah, there'll be so much that we can dive into a whole episode on.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So if anyone has any questions, please send them in around this topic because it's so important. Also, you recently, for folks that don't follow you on Instagram, you were recently like the face of an ABC kind of like big deep dive into something or other. I can't even remember what it was now. And I remember just flicking through Instagram. I'm like, hold on a second. That's Gemma.
Yeah, that was about budgets. That was about budgets getting a bad rap. And it was so funny because my cousin sent it to me and he was like, I was just reading this whole article and I totally missed that it was from you. And my face is like all over it. So yeah, it's always funny when people go, oh, I heard you there.
Okay, cool. Well, okay. So I feel like we're in the presence of greatness. That's cool. You did say though off air that you had a client story for us. So I'm curious.
I had a very interesting discovery call. So I've been doing those discovery calls where if people aren't sure if they need financial advice or coaching or where their next step is, taking lots of calls on that. So you can book into my diary for a 10, 15-minute chat and I can just give you some direction, whether it's with me or with somebody else. So I had a really interesting call this week. So this person about 12 months ago, almost 12 months ago, bought her first house, but she couldn't buy it with her partner at the time because they weren't a permanent resident. So she bought it with her dad. And now they're like, oh, let's unwind that and put the partner on it. And they're like, cool, what do we need to do? Do we go to the bank and get a refinance? And I'm like, ooh, you don't. It's very complicated. So really, there's 3 professionals that she's going to need to help make the decision. One, if it's doable, if it's worth it, and what are the costs involved? Because in this scenario, the father's actually on the title. So it's not just that he was a guarantor or a security. He's actually on the title. So changing it over to her partner is a sale. So there's potentially capital gains for him because he's never lived in the property. He was an investor and it's her first home. There's potentially capital gains. So they're going to have to talk to an accountant about what applies there. They're going to have to talk to the conveyancer about, well, how was it set up initially and what split is there and what are the costs to changing it over and what the stamp duty is going to be because it's triggering a sale of a portion of it. And then they're going to have to talk to a mortgage broker about, can she take over the loan? Can the partner now go on it? So it's actually a lot more complicated than just doing a refinance. And, depending on if it has been 12 months, the capital gains potentially for the dad is going to be totally different. So there's 3 big pieces of information that they need to get together for the piece of the puzzle so they can decide how to move forwards. But the takeout from it is property is so expensive to get into and out of. So you really want to make sure that when you're going into things, you are planning ahead for what it might look like. And, they might have, if they had this information 12 months ago, they might have still decided to do it. It's just about making sure that you're making decisions with all of the information that might be relevant down the track. But yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opener to her that there were these knock-on effects that they hadn't considered.
For sure. And you mentioned the word conveyancer there before. Some states call it conveyancer. Some people call it solicitor. There's different things in different jurisdictions. I think the big takeaway from me from this, Gem, is that maybe a good conversation with the lawyer or solicitor or the conveyancer at the time to understand what the implications were. From that perspective might have been really important, but also from an accounting perspective, maybe just having the chat saying, hey, I'm thinking of doing this.
Yeah.
What are the implications?
Yeah. And I think that's always why it's really important when you're making a decision, whether it's investing or like in shares or property, you're thinking about what could happen down the track. And if you're getting advice, talk to the person about that. So they could have, said, well, yes, this is our goal to get in as quickly as possible, but this may change, just so you've got as much information as possible. But yeah, it might have been a really good deal and they might have decided to do it regardless. And it can be done. It absolutely can be, but they've just got to find out those 3 key pieces of information so they know what they're working with. So that was a fun one.
And from the father's perspective too, he might have other plans in life, right? Like I see this a lot of the time with people that go guarantor. The parents are like, we've gone guarantor for our kids, which is great, and you help them into a property, sure. But you might want to sell your house that you've used as security for that house, and then you can't until you're off that one. So just being aware and understanding the consequences of decisions is important. Yeah.
And if you're going to go into these relationship, like joint ventures, whether it's with family, a partner, a friend, whoever it is, you need to have an exit strategy and be really clear on it because it can ruin relationships. So you have to kind of think about, but what if you need to do that and we're forced to sell? What if this happens? And you need to be really clear with it. And if that is not okay, like you're not comfortable having those conversations, you shouldn't be doing it. But yeah, these people will be totally fine. She just needed some direction and wasn't worried about it at all. They're like, yep, cool. We just needed to know where the key pieces were, like where do we actually go to start the ball rolling?
Yeah, that's fair. I've had some really good conversations with people in the community this week. For folks that are listening on the Australian Finance Podcast, and you're thinking, I've been listening for a while, you really do miss out on, I would say, like seriously the best of Rask by only listening to the podcast. And I don't say this as just go get a free account or enroll in a course, but you seriously do, which is why we want to do these weekly shows so you actually understand what else is happening. Like in the last week, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we launched, and you would only know this if you get our email, you can actually book a free call with Gemma, myself, Mitch, and soon other people in the team. It's just a free service. And then I won't reveal too much of it because we might accidentally blow up the event and Mitch will be a bit stressed about it. But we're actually doing a bit of a meetup in Sydney next week. And you'd only know that if you're either, part of the inner sanctum and invested with us, or you're actually in the free community because that's where we put all of our events. So
I jumped on there this morning actually, and there were some questions that came in yesterday that were really good that I was
Okay.
Giving my opinion on.
Okay. Yeah, just throwing some opinions around. But yeah, so that's how we manage all of our events. We did a big roadshow a few years ago, Gem, and we did events around the country. And logistically, it's really hard to manage events. Like even just like little things like where do you book tickets, or how do you add it to someone's calendar if they get a ticket, like a reminder email, all that stuff.
So many moving parts.
Yeah, from our side, like from a consumer's point of view, it's like, oh, just buy the ticket and I rock up. It's like Ticketmaster, right? Yeah, but we're not Ticketmaster. So we're going to manage all that. So the best way to do all that is in the community, and you can just get notified if there's an event in your state or whatever, and it's coming up. But we're in Sydney this week. The whole team's there. It's going to be heaps of fun. We've got investors in the room. So I've been thinking about that. And finally, my little tidbit, something that an author that I love is Seth Godin, who wrote a really famous book back in the day called Permission Marketing. I'm holding up one here for people that are listening. This is Strategy. It's Seth's new book, and it's all about, I guess, the subtlety of having a strategy. If you're a freelancer, if you run a business, if you're just going through life and you have a strategy for life, he talks about the difference between like tactics and having a strategy or like a game plan, like so many different things. And if you just want a taste of the book, this fantastic podcast he did with Tim Ferriss over on the Tim Ferriss podcast, really good. So highly recommend that show. Gem, we've got a lot of questions we want to get through. So I'm going to quickly read out a disclaimer. We've got questions about super, we've got about budgets, so many different things.
There is a good mix today.
Yeah. Quick disclaimer is that if you do send your question to us, we love them. Just remember, we don't know what your needs, goals, or objectives are. That's really important, because then it means we cannot give you personal advice. Even if we wanted to on the podcast, we couldn't anyway, but we do not know those things. So speak to a licensed and trusted financial planner before you act on any of the information. When you write into us, we ask you for a funny name. And I love the funny names. Like obviously PG.
They're very creative.
Yeah. Because then what it does is, from our perspective, it creates an extra layer of safety, so that if anyone was to ever ask or accuse us of giving some type of advice, which we're clearly not doing, we can say we have literally no idea, because unless Save and Grace, who is wrote into us, or Uncomfortably Fence Sitting, unless that's your legal name and we happen to know you, we just simply don't know who you are. So keep that in mind. Final warning, if we mention things like super funds, insurance, ETFs, all those fun things, brokerage accounts, they have product disclosure statements, TMDs, target market determination, or even just fee pages and disclosure documents. Go and check those out. We'll do our best to try and acknowledge any maybe like relationships we have. Like, you know who the sponsors are of the podcast, but like if I'm invested in an ETF, I'll tell you those types of things. It's not an endorsement, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Now, the first question, Gem, it's actually a really good one because it actually relates to our summer series. It's from Ali Bali, who wrote in and said, you guys asked for examples of spending to guess people's values. Here's mine. It's the first year I started tracking it. I didn't budget, but I'm starting one this year. So they've broken down their category of spending and the percentage. They've got savings, investing, rent. I'll let you maybe fill it in and what your take was on this. And maybe if you could remind folks of what it was that we're talking about.
Yeah, so this challenge where we said to people, send in your categories or your statement, whatever, it was around, we were talking about spending and budgets and value aligned spending. And we were like, you can generally tell by looking at where people spend money, what their values are and what's important to them. So yes, she sent it in, which was great. And so I was having a look at this. So these expenses that we got provided, we got like the category, the dollar amount, and then the percent, which was great because I didn't have to work it all out. So it worked out to be about $96,000 a year. And I'm presuming that this is a single person. Rent was included in there, so no mortgage. So that means that their gross income would need to be about $130,000 because savings and investing. So I'm presuming that what they sent through was getting their pay to zero because there was, a good amount for savings and investing. So let's say they're on about $130,000 a year, and the expenses then worked out to be 96, so their net, all of their net pay. But I actually loved these categories. So it was so balanced. Like they were prioritizing security, like 10% of stuff was going to investing and savings. Their housing was was actually quite low in a percentage. and they had lots of space for fun. Like priorities in there were hobbies, travel, like food experiences, and then there was gifts as well. So giving, which tells me that they prioritize like relationships and stuff. So I actually thought this was such a well-rounded budget, like, and even the discretionary spending was kind of broken up into like fitness goals and entertaining and things that you can see that they actually really add value to people's lives. So I thought that these person's values lean towards stability, like security stability, with their savings goals and their priorities, but then also health being a major one, because they did have a big expense in there for health, which might be proactive or it might be maintaining some health kind of things. But the health element was quite high.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a couple of things here that jumped out to me. The first was the gifts. They've put more aside for gifts than travel and, to be honest, investing, which is to be honest, that's a really interesting sign, because it's kind of like, just show me where your budget goes and I'll tell you kind of who you are. You know that old cliche of give me the boy at 7, I'll show you the man, or something like that. This is kind of like, you give me the budget, I'll show you what you prioritize in your life. I recently caught up with, for the podcast, Pocketsmith co-founder and CEO Jason Leung. Absolute spirit. Just total, one of those people that you just come across. He's like the happiest guy in the world. Him and Dora over at Pocketsmith, they are a sponsor of the show. They do personal finance software. Just wonderful people. And that podcast is going to air soon, Gem. And what he talked about is like he thinks what budgeting should be is a way to prioritize life-affirming spending. So I love that idea of what makes you feel more alive. Spend on that stuff. When you map out your budget, you might have to make some quote unquote sacrifice, which is how all the finance books tend to talk about it. But really, you're doing that so you can spend more on the things that you want.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a good way to think about it. And you can see it from this person. They're spending more on gifts and they're not spending that much on rent, which is only 28% of their income.
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. It's under control. Really balanced budget is what I would say.
Yeah, balanced. And yes, investing's low, but savings percent is pretty high. So I was kind of thinking, well, we don't know their age and where they're at in life. It might be that they've actually got the habits there that are great, but they're dipping their toe into learning about investing. But the amount there, I was like, oh, that's a really good start. So I liked it.
Well, a lot of people say who bought a house like 10 or 20 years ago, their mortgages are far, far, far lower these days, not just because they paid them off, but also because they've typically got the really, good rates on those loans, or they've refinanced on the way down. So there are things that they can do to kind of ease that cash flow and that budget expense for them, or they may be sharing those types of things. So the second question, which is great, it comes from Save and Grace. They say, I am a single parent. I have just moved my son from state school to private school. That sounds like a big move. Due to a lack of support for his needs. I am on a low income, but a good saver. When saving for the upcoming fees, where should I put that money? Do I put it in an offset account, a high interest savings account, or somewhere else? Now, Gem, moving a child from public to private school is a huge expense change.
It's going to be expense. Yeah. And depending on the child's age, it might actually not be it's either way, it's going to be a big jump, but it might actually be at the lowest it is and start going up really swiftly as well. So this year might be very different to future years. But you need to prioritize needs and all of that kind of stuff. So if you have room in your budget and you can make it work, that's great, right? And we talk about values and priorities. One thing with that is I always encourage people to talk to the schools about scholarships, discounts, if there's different pay methods, all of that kind of stuff, because there's usually things that they don't advertise. So first of all, my advice would be to absolutely find out everything you can about all of your options. And then this person's asked, if it should be in an offset account, a high interest account, or somewhere else. So I guess those two are your options. Paying in advance, like if a direct debit, so it's not even sitting with you, might be an option. And then you could always consider things like education bonds if you've got enough there to save for future years. But if you're just kind of saving, it might not be worth doing that. It might overcomplicate it.
Yeah, so this is kind of like an extension, more of a message to every other parent that might be listening, or grandparents. There are things called investment bonds or insurance bonds is what they used to be called, but there's another name that some of them have. It's like putting a different label on the same thing, which is called an education bond. And effectively, this is like a separate thing, like money goes into this investment thing called an education bond. And it is what we call a tax paid entity. So it's where you put money into, and then in the future, you may be able to pull it out tax free.
Yeah.
And that's the big benefit, is it can grow off to the side, separate to your own tax position, like your own shares and whatever, and then tax free, it comes back to pay for educational expenses. But it's more like a 10-year plan, I would say. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, so that's the traditional bond, but if it's an education bond, you can be accessing it before that 10-year period for education expenses. They're usually most effective for people that, have got a longer time frame and have a higher taxable income. And this person said they have a low taxable income. So I think they're probably right thinking, should I be having an offset, a high interest account? And then I'd be encouraging them to talk to the school about other options. But I guess the main difference is if we just look at those two other options they mentioned, the high interest and the offset. The high interest account is going to be accessible and get, whatever interest rate, that's going to be taxable to them. So at the end of the year, whatever interest that they earned on that will be added to their taxable income and they might have some tax to pay. Whereas an offset account, they're going to save interest on their home loan, which could be 6.5% at the moment. And they don't pay tax on what you save. You just pay tax on what you earn. So an offset account can be great from that and it's still accessible. I guess my concern is when I see people using offset accounts is if they only have the option to have one and they've lumped all these goals in, like, well, that's for a holiday, that's for education, that's for my new car coming up in 5 years, it can get really messy and there's not a lot of transparency. And I see people go backwards when they have really good intentions, but there's just not the transparency. So I think you've got to find out what works for you. But the main considerations are a high interest account, you're going to get a set interest rate, but you're going to pay some tax on it. And an offset account, it's going to reduce your mortgage rather than give you interest, but either gives you the accessibility that you can get to it, the minute those fees are due.
Yep. I'd say from my 2 cents on this one is you're doing a great thing. In fact, just even writing in for the question, a lot of single parents, it's really hard. We get it. Gem is one of those people.
I am one. And my kids go to public school and I can't imagine trying to squeeze in private schools into my budget.
Yeah, but in this case, they may need that. So I just think that it's a fantastic attitude adjustment because that's often you can just kind of give up and it's understandable why people get there, but just that affirmative approach is really, really commendable. So that's fantastic. And that will solve the problem, I think, just that attitude. So.
Yeah. And whatever you do the first year, like the first year is going to be the harder one because you're working out what works. Whatever you do this year might be different next year. So if you try a high interest or you try a payment plan with the school or whatever, then next year reassess your options, ask more questions, look at how your finance set up and look what works and what doesn't. So just keep moving with it because chances are they're going to be in school for a while. So you'll refine what actually works and you just do what you can with the best knowledge you've got at the moment and then tweak it as you learn more.
Yeah. If there are any like the tutors or anyone that's listening or watching that you have a solution to this problem, I would love to know because there's a lot of extracurricular things that people aren't aware of, whether it's community groups, whether it's like private tutoring that may help in certain respects or even aids and that type of stuff. A lot of different things exist throughout Australia and obviously we have a national audience. So if you're in that camp, if you're one of these primary educators, secondary educators or in an adjacent field, please write into us because then next week we can come back and give an update on that answer and say, hey, we actually learnt this week. Just use the same way that you would submit a question, just drop it in there. And by the way, I should say, Jem, this is our first Q&A show. So anyone that sends in a question for the first month, you will get the Value Investor Program, which is an advanced investing course, $499 for free. If you write in a question, your question's on the show, jump on the website in the instant chat to say, hey, I asked this question, where my course at? Because we will give it to you. So that's a little incentive for you to send in your questions and to help each other out. Okay, we've got another question here from Warren Buffett. And actually, it's without the 2 T's. It's only got Buffett with 1 T, which means buffet, just as a little Warren Buffett trivia. So Warren Buffett has written in and said, I'm planning to get married soon under a community property regime. I have no idea what that means, by the way. I just took it as the married because I didn't really know what that was either. When you read the rest of the question, I was like, I just
presume we're
Yeah.
a marriage. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm planning to get married soon under a community property regime, and my financial contribution is much higher than my partner's. When buying a house, is there a way to structure the ownership so that each person owns a share proportional to their contribution? This is a very common question, and there's a few things in this, but Gem, it may actually even relate to what you were telling us at the top of the show.
Yeah, it's one of these scenarios that it's a little bit, well, it is a lot more complex than what most people think. There are different ways to buy property. So there's a couple of things with this. So we had a question on another episode about couples sharing money. And I think this is where it comes in, having those conversations going in, well, how do we contribute to household expenses, whether that's 50-50 or in proportion to what you contribute or bring in. So the conversations are so important, but from a legal and a practical perspective, you can outline the contribution and the ownership on a property at the start, but you need to do it in a legal document. So you'd get legal advice and you'd be speaking to the conveyancer, so the lawyer that actually does the contracts, as well as the lawyer that does the family
law type stuff.
Yeah. So it might actually be two lawyers that you need. I don't know, maybe they do both, but you'd be looking at, in Australia, we call it a binding financial agreement. I would assume that would come into play, that kind of outlines, well, what are we bringing into the relationship? How are we going to manage money together? So this is kind of like, we always hear Americans call it a prenup. I guess it's Australia's answer to that. It's kind of like an outline on what's being contributed and how you're going to manage things. So I would think that will be very important. But from a practical perspective, there are two ways, that I know of, that you can buy a house. Tenants in common or joint tenants. So I think most people default to the joint tenants, which just means you own it together. And if one of you dies, it just becomes the other person's. You come off it. Whereas tenants in common actually shows your ownership, and if one of you passes away, that portion goes to your estate, doesn't default to the other person's.
Yep.
Is that your understanding of how that works?
Yeah, so there's two different options here. And exactly. So effectively, one of them requires some thought, and one of them is more implied in that the way, if you just go by the willy-nilly option, it's what most people, the first option that you assumed there. But this is really important to understand if you're not buying with your partner, I think. If you're buying with someone else, it's really important to understand, like friends or family, like even extended family. So important to understand the differences here and speak to someone about it. Because we just said at the top, I don't think I've ever heard a good story of people buying a house together, to be honest. Other than a couple. I can't recall.
A lot of those don't pan out either.
Yeah.
And why you could do this as well is a second marriage, right? So imagine me buying a house with somebody now. My share of that house that I'm contributing, I want to go to my kids, not to default to that person. So there's so many instances. I kind of think the joint tenants, the default one is kind of like, well, you don't really have any assets. You're building from the start together. It makes sense. But it's like, well, when you're bringing different things to the table, the other one seems to make sense. But the most important thing is getting legal advice and the transparency and the communication, that you're both on the same page and you see it as what you're gaining from it, like both of you getting security and certainty, not what you're as a negative thing, what you're losing.
The other thing around the binding financial agreements, my understanding is, I don't have one, but my understanding is that sometimes you can set basically a time limit on the binding financial agreement, such that you can set it so effectively, like you say to your partner, hey, yes, this might be a little bit awkward for you. I'm coming in with more assets and I've got to be respectful that you might not have as much, you might feel inadequate. I've got to acknowledge all those things. But this is to protect me, and maybe after 5 years or maybe after 10 years, this disappears. Like maybe we talk about that. And if everything goes well, I'm only just protecting myself for the next 5 years. But after that, this goes away. And so it's a way to effectively put in a protection if you are unsure, but also communicate it in a way that's like, it's not forever maybe. And it depends on the situation. But I would say always it's good to have the understanding of legal advice, even before you move in. You don't have to necessarily communicate them that you're going to get legal advice. It's your assets. You can go and speak to someone independently, get the feedback, and then you're going to have a conversation more informed, and it's money well spent. So I would say very good idea. So Uncomfortable Fence Sitter says, "Hi, Owen and Gemma. I've been really enjoying the summer series. I'm currently trying to save for a first home deposit. I have a certain amount each month, but I also invest some money in ETFs for the long term. I'm unsure if it is wise to split my money like this, or if it would be better putting all of my money towards a deposit and then resuming investing in an ETF after I purchase a home. I am keen to hear your thoughts in a general sense, of course." That's good to know.
They listen to the disclaimer.
They do. I might go first.
Yeah.
And then you can go. Now everyone's different, so I'm sure you'll have something to say on that. But in my general kind of wisdom for everyone that listens to the show or watches is try a bit of both. And the reason I say that, it could be $10 in ETFs, it could be 1,000, it could be whatever. But the quicker you can learn the ropes of what is investing in the share market or ETFs or however you decide to do it, the more comfortable you will feel when the time comes that you do put more money into it. If that's after your house, if it's whatever. The good thing about investing is you can use a platform like Raise and it just rounds up your coffee payment, or Sharesies, which is like 1 cent, or there's a bunch of them that have like very small minimums, and you can just put a little bit of money in, see how it reacts, learn about the ETFs or the shares you're buying, and just go from there. It doesn't mean that you have to do all or nothing, but what you do get in the meantime is a really good education, a really, really good education. And the second thing that I'll say, Gem, is that if your house purchase, if you're thinking that's 10 years away, I'm thinking invest. But if you're saying it's 10 days away, I'm thinking not invest at all.
Yeah.
Even if it's in the next couple of years, not worth it. You get a good interest rate at the moment from the bank. Let that keep you company while you listen to podcasts, and maybe, put 10 or $20 in here or there just to learn about it. That's my 2 cents on this, Gem.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think the main thing is that this person needs to be asking themselves is, what is the priority? So right now I'm kind of imagining maybe they've got a set amount in their surplus in their budget and they're maybe splitting it between the two. But what is the priority? Is the house the priority and do you want to get there quicker, or is the investing? If the house is the priority, maybe you change the amount so it's 95% is going to the house, but 5% is still going. Because I love that, the learning curve that you've already been, so many times I'll see 50-plus-year-olds that are like, great, our home loan's paid off. Now we're going to learn about investing, and it's such a steep curve for them. So I think just work out the priority and work out which one you want to be focused on. And if the time frame allows you to do both, great, but just work out what the splits are. And like anything, it can change, right? So you could start going all in for the house and then come back to investing, or you could change the splits in 6 months, but just have those regular check-ins to say, I'm doing it this way. Does that still align with my goals, and how do I feel about it? But I would love people to do a bit of both, even if it's $5 into the investing. So they're getting comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the reason I bring up Raise is it's kind of like investing without thinking a lot about it. And a lot of people go, like, if like friends or family that I've helped set up in this regard, is I'll help them set up with a Raise account. Like, that's so easy, just use it. And you go and spend money, or just takes a little bit out and put it in. And then they're like, oh, a year later, like, I had $1,000 in there. And it's a really interesting kind of feedback loop. And they're like, oh, well, I've been an investor this whole time.
I'm an investor. Yeah. And if you have no spare money in your budget to invest and you want to, just start engaging with your super fund. Put the app on the phone. Your super fund is an investment portfolio. So if you want to be an investor, but you don't have a spare couple of bucks to get started, just start looking at your super, checking how that's going, because you are already an investor.
Speaking of fence sitter, you should look at the First Home Super Saver scheme as well. FHSSSSS, and it just goes on forever, but it's out there. And it's a real thing, and it's actually really powerful. So if anyone is on this show, and you listen to us each and every week, I hope, and you're thinking, what is a way I can get into my home sooner? Obviously, speaking with a mortgage broker and figuring out what you got to do is really important. But secondly, there's the First Home Super Saver scheme, which may be a little bit of a boost. Maybe it's an extra $5,000 over a few years, maybe an extra 10. It is a way to kind of tax effectively save a little bit more for super. There are some rules. I would encourage you to speak to a
There's lots of
financial
rules.
advisor.
Yeah. And there's calculators that you can do online.
Yes.
So you can put in a calculator and go, oh, when do I want to buy the house? How much of a savings have I got? And you can map out, well, am I going to be better off? Or, yeah. So I do that. Maybe your super fund gives some free information on it as well. But yeah, we could probably do a whole episode on that one too.
Definitely. Hayden writes in, this is his very creative name. Thank you, Hayden. Says, this is at the other end of the spectrum, by the way. I'm looking at setting up a self-managed super fund to buy a residential investment property within my super. What are your thoughts on this generally? And how would you compare this idea versus investing in a conventional super fund? Real quick, Hayden and anyone else that's listening, we don't give personal advice on this podcast. So go and seek a professional seriously and a non-conflicted professional before setting up a self-managed super fund. I think that would be really smart.
An accountant and a financial advisor, and preferably ones that do stuff outside self-managed super funds, so they're not just like the one. But yeah, you need to really weigh it up for yourself. But just on my personal thought, I don't like residential property in self-managed super funds purely so he's gone versus a conventional. So I'm thinking he's meaning from having an investment diversified share portfolio in there. So I don't like residential property in super purely because when I see people do it, they've got one home, maybe an investment property in their name, and then they put a residential investment property in their super. And then all of their assets are in Australian residential property. I think that is super risky. So yeah, that's the only reason I don't like it is because that's what people do. They've got a house and now they've got one property there. I think that you need diversification and a lot of people aren't comfortable to do it themselves. So having a conventional super, like they called it, is that diversification for you. So that's why I am not a fan of them. But there is absolutely a time and a place and you just need to get personal advice. But be aware that you might be putting all your eggs in one or two houses in Australia in residential, and you're just hoping that house you picked on that street in that suburb is your retirement. It's scary.
I'm going to throw a bit of shade here, and some people will probably write in about that's not fair, but there's a lot of crooked people out there that recommend SMSFs. I'm just going to stay flat. Their incentive is to set up an SMSF because they'll get money from you. They'll get a lot more money from you in yearly tax returns. And
it can be expensive.
To the point where a self-managed super fund is just like I don't know, is the word a misnomer? It's not actually self-managed. You need other people to do stuff for you. There are some cheap platforms out there that promise to do it for you. It's still not the same thing. What I would say is there are two really important reasons why you would consider a self-managed super fund. Number one is you're a business owner. There is considerable benefits for business owners to have a self-managed super fund, so explore those. If you're seeing an accountant and an advisor, as Gemma said, make sure they're not in the same building. Like different people giving you different
Not your
opinions.
referrer, but yeah.
yeah. Just like different people because you'll get independent opinions. And the second reason is if you've got a large balance. I was chatting to an investor this week, young fella, him and his partner, really good jobs, tremendous savers. I actually saw a financial advisor like a decade ago who said, you guys should just put extra money into super because you're good savers, put money in it. Now they've got a big balance in their late 30s and they're thinking, we're paying a lot of fees to our industry super fund. Does it make sense to have an SMSF? And for them, they love investing and they're sensible. So maybe it does, but it's not for everyone. I have an industry fund. Never change super funds until you've considered your insurance because you may have insurance in there that you'll never get back. So take a look at that. But I think generally residential property inside super, no. And there's a lot of people that sell that off the plan stuff in different parts of Australia, I'll say, Gem. Be very, very cautious. Just keep it.
You need to really do your homework on it.
Yeah. And like you said, there's a lot of reasons why you do it and a lot of reasons why you don't.
But depending on your balance, maybe you can do both. Maybe you can do that and it makes sense after you got the advice and then you still have a good balance in there that is in a share portfolio. I'm just kind of referring to the ones that I see that's pretty much tiny bit of cash, property, and then they own a home. And I'm like, it scares me.
Now, you're from Queensland. I'm from Victoria. You were originally from Vic, so thereabouts. So you guys got all the sun, but you've also got all the people that set up people in SMSFs. So
is that what Queensland's known for?
It's in the finance industry. There's a lot of people that want to get you invested in property. I'm just being silly. But But seriously, there's a lot of people out there that will see you come to them and like, oh, you don't have enough money to buy this house that I'm trying to sell you. But your self-managed super fund might. Here's my friend who's an accountant that can set one up for you and you'll get this house.
Yeah.
Often tragedy.
And that's why people will do it as well, because they're tapped out and they're borrowing capacity in their own name and they go, oh, cool, we'll do it in the super. But you need to think long-term, is that right? Yes, it gets you into a property, but do you have enough diversification and are you comfortable? But get advice. You need advice from a financial advisor and probably an accountant as well.
Yep, good one. Final question, and we'll try and be a bit quick on this. It's a long question about super, and it's super detailed, and it's great because it does kind of like illustrate what a lot of people think about. It's from Super Confused. Gemma, can you read out the bit that you want to read out?
Okay, so it's got lots of kind of comments in it, and it's just like the main thing is, hey, super's really confusing and there's lots of different things. And when it's been mentioned on the podcast, it's kind of like a throwaway comment. Yes, you can add money to super. So that's the most of it. But the actual question in it is, my question is relating to non-concessional contributions. So there'll be after-tax ones that have a limit of 120,000 this year. Relating to those after-tax contributions for somebody in their 50s, is there a difference to me investing 100,000 inside super versus outside super in ETFs? So that is their question. This person, I'm imagining, has 100,000 spare each year. They've already done their tax, and now they're like, what do I do with 100,000 each year that's already been taxed? Do I invest it in ETFs? What's the difference if I put it in super? So that is the question here, and as I said, they're super confused.
Confused. Good name. Great name.
Yeah, I like that one. So there are big differences. The two that I think of immediately are, if you invest it in ETFs, you're going to pay tax at your marginal tax rate, but you are going to have access to it straight away. So this person's in their 50s, let's say they're 50, there is minimum 10 years till they will hit preservation age. So their time frame is really important. So is there a risk of them needing this money if they want to retire, a few years before they can access their super, or they're thinking about buying property or something, then that would rule super out. Whereas the benefit of doing it in super is it's going to be taxed at a concessional rate of 15%. Yep. And after they've met preservation and they're retired, they can have nearly 2 mil of money there and never pay tax again on the earnings or the income. So if we think of like a 60-year-old, we want heaps of money in super rather than in ETFs and things outside that we might still be paying tax on in retirement. So it's a good place to have it, but it just depends on if you're going to get to preservation age or you want it sooner. So tax benefit in super is really, really good. It's good now while you're working, but it's great in retirement, zero. But the access is the part where I would really be diving into. And maybe it's a middle ground. Maybe you got 100,000 and you decide, cool, I might do 50 into super and 50 into ETF so it keeps my options open. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but your time frame and your need to access it and your marginal tax rate are the three things that you need to consider before you can make that decision.
Okay, you've done three. Can I do one?
Yeah.
I think, and this is a nuanced response, so please don't misconstrue my words. If you're under 45 and you have a really good job, I don't think for most people there's a huge need to contribute extra to super. But hear me out. Because if you have a good job, your employer is automatically putting money into super, and provided you've got it set up well, it's a good investment, that will continue to grow. If you're 45 and over, now is the time to start to consider, like, do some modeling, speak to a financial advisor and be like, where am I going to be at 55? Where am I going to be at 60? And where am I going to be at 65? And from there, start to contribute extra until you get to the point that you want to be. Gem, I see that the Rask community isn't amazing at saving. Like, it's crazy how, like, you speak to them every week. I speak to the community every week.
They're very disciplined.
Exactly. And the problem that I see with a lot of our community that have been following us for a long time is they actually oversave, and they are kind of like banking on something in the future at the expense of maybe what's happening now. And there's a lot of FIRE community members, financial independence, retire early. Super doesn't jive with the concept of retire early. So if you want to retire on time, use super. It's great for everything. But you can tax effectively invest outside of super. That's really important to understand. You can use a family trust if you really want to get into the weeds of that. It's another episode. You can use an investment bond.
Yeah, like we went through before. Depending on your marginal tax rate, that might make sense.
Yep. You can just buy in ETFs that have lower income and lower what we call turnover, or shares that you're not constantly buying and selling. Those types of people don't really listen to this podcast anyway, so that's good. You could invest in a property that you don't sell for a long time and it turns into a passive income stream. So there are ways you can manage tax outside super. Multiple ways to do this. I think you just got to, as you get closer to retirement, start to prioritize super, provided you're already adding some. Now, if you're self-employed like I was in my 20s, and I wasn't adding really anything to super, Gem, to be honest with you, you may have some catching up to do. In which case, my wisdom may be start adding more now, even if you're in your 30s. But realistically, if you've got a good job, you're investing in your career, you're going to earn more, and your employer's paying you super, finally, you're going to be okay as long as you're investing some way. That's my general gist. So there's maybe a slight bit of disagreement in there, but it's slight similarity. You're obviously the super expert here, though.
Yeah, I'd jump online and do some calculators. The goal is, though, like if you can have as much in super that gets to that tax-free cap, which is nearly 2 mil, because the issue is, you build all these assets outside and then super is then the front runner for tax-free, and you're like, oh, I want to put them in there. There's caps to how much you could do it. So I think it doesn't need to be all one way or all the other. I think you need to find, well, if that's your surplus, if it's $100 a week or $100,000 a year, like you work out what your surplus is and go, what do I want to put towards that? And that was like the other question that we had about we had one just before, about ETFs versus saving for the house. Just work out what your comfort level is, do a bit of both. The other thing I like about super is you don't have to decide every pay to put money in. You've got...
You can do it at the end of June 30th.
So I tell people, put a reminder in your calendar for the 1st of June when you can look at, well, what did I earn? What did I save? And then decide to do a lump sum. Like you don't have to be all or nothing. And what you do this year doesn't have to be the same next year.
And I just think like everyone that's listening to this, if you're saving and you're investing, you're amazing. Like you're going to be okay. When it comes down to which one you do at what time, there's an optimum thing that looks good in a spreadsheet, but you've got to make sure you're doing what makes you feel comfortable.
The sleep at night test.
For me, Gem, I'm kind of like, yes, invest for the long term. I invest optimistically for the future. Otherwise, I wouldn't invest at all. But there's a little bit in me that's like, some bozo up in Canberra is going to change the rules next year on super, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after, until I don't even know what I'm doing with it anymore. And I can reveal my age as a 34-year-old. I'm a bit worried that in the next 30 years, there's going to be some change. So I'm trying to do a bit of everything so that I'm kind of prepared no matter what kind of comes down the pike.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really important. And I'm like a massive fan of super, right? But I make sure I have assets outside because I don't know if I want to work till 60 or whatever they move the age up to. So investing outside in things that give you choice, even if it's not the most tax effective, can be a smart thing as well. Yep. So you just got to find the balance. If you've got 100,000 surplus a year, I would be getting financial advice though, because you can afford it.
Okay, so we've had some great questions come in from Ali Bali, Saving Grace, Warren Buffet, Uncomfortable Fence Fitter, Hayden, and Super Confused. If you guys write into us, guys and gals, you'll get the Value Investor Program for free. Anyone that writes in this month, write it, like you send us a question, we'll give you something for free. If you've already got that course, we'll give you a membership for free. We'll give you a free something or other. Just send it to us. The other thing that I'll say is that we love doing these, so send them in. I would sum up, we talked about like a lot of relationship stuff, a lot of like superannuation questions. I don't know if I told you this, and this might be a bit off the course of this episode, but I said, like, if you think about relationships and getting involved with something, Gem, you kind of want to get involved with someone that you wouldn't mind breaking up with. And what I mean by that is, if you go into something thinking that with the end in mind, would this guy or gal be a good person to break up? Would they be respectful? And I think about that with investing. In 20 years, what's my 20-year self going to say? Like, what was that a good decision? Like, prepare for those different consequences, whether it's the binding financial agreement question or the buying a house with the father or setting up all the money to go in super when maybe a little bit outside would have been good. think about your future self. Do them a kindness. Gemma, you are a money coach. People can book in to have a free chat with you. I'll put the link in the show notes. You're a qualified advisor. You do so much on Instagram. You're there basically every day. So good luck with the dinosaurs. Good luck with Olivia Rodrigo.
Olivia. Yeah, I'm going to start sending you Spotify songs. I'll pick out her best ones for you to listen to.
You have to share it in the group chat for sure. Someone else can do me the favor. But this has been heaps of fun. So thanks for doing this first Q&A with me. And I'll see you next week.
See you then. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.